Have you ever wondered what drives people to risk everything in the pursuit of justice? What kind of courage does it take to defy deeply rooted systems of oppression and demand change? The civil rights movement is one of the most powerful examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to reshape the course of history. Imagine life in the 1950s and 60s, where racial segregation wasn't just a mindset, it was the law. African Americans were segregated in schools, public places, buses, and even in the very act of voting. But that system didn't emerge overnight. To understand how the civil rights movement came to be, we need to rewind to a time just after the American Civil War, to the period known as Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, there was hope that newly freed African Americans would achieve equality. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, promising freedom, citizenship, and voting rights to African Americans. But these promises were shattered by the rise of Jim Crow laws, which codified racial segregation and disenfranchised black voters for decades. The harsh realities of segregation became a daily burden that African Americans bore. But underneath the surface, a movement was brewing. A movement that would change everything. Let's fast forward to one of the defining moments that ignited the civil rights movement. It's December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. A seamstress named Rosa Parks steps onto a bus after a long day of work. The law requires her to give up her seat to a white passenger, but this time, she quietly refuses. Her simple act of defiance would soon become the spark that ignited a year-long protest known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Led by a young, dynamic preacher named Martin Luther King Jr., African Americans in Montgomery walked, carpooled, and found alternative ways to travel for over 380 days, crippling the bus system economically and signaling that change was on the horizon. Rosa Parks wasn't alone in her defiance, though. Everyday people, mothers, fathers, students, stood up against segregation in their own ways, small and large. This collective courage fueled a movement that swept across the South and eventually the nation. Peaceful marches, sit-ins, and boycotts became powerful tools in the fight for equality. One such powerful event was the Greensboro sit-ins of 1960, where 4 African-American college students sat at a segregated lunch counter in North Carolina, refusing to leave until they were served. What started as a small protest quickly spread, leading to sit-ins across the South and forcing businesses to rethink their discriminatory practices. But legal victories also played a critical role in dismantling segregation. In 1954, the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education was decided by the Supreme Court, declaring that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. It was a monumental win for the movement, but it was only the beginning. Resistance to integration was fierce, with many Southern states openly defying the ruling. Change would come, but not without struggle. Perhaps one of the most iconic moments in the civil rights movement came on August 28, 1963, when over 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was there, at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, that Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his legendary "I Have a Dream" speech. His words echoed across the nation, capturing the hopes and dreams of millions fighting for a better future. King's vision of a world where people were judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, became a rallying cry for equality. The pressure from these relentless efforts finally broke through in 1964 with the signing of the Civil Rights Act by President Lyndon B. Johnson. This landmark legislation outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in public places, employment, and education. It was a historic victory, but the fight wasn't over yet. The following year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, striking down barriers that had long kept African Americans from exercising their right to vote. No more literacy tests, poll taxes, or intimidation tactics. This law empowered black citizens to have a real voice in shaping their country's future. But even as these victories were won, the struggle for civil rights was far from over. From the streets of Selma to the Freedom Rides, the movement was fueled by the belief that equality was not a privilege, but a right, one that all people, regardless of race, deserve. Today, the legacy of the civil rights movement continues to inspire social justice movements around the world. When we look at figures like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and the countless unnamed individuals who risked everything, we are reminded that the fight for justice is not just a chapter in history, it's a constant call to action. The civil rights movement wasn't simply a battle for African Americans, it was a movement for human dignity and equality. It reshaped America's identity, forcing the nation to confront its deepest inequalities and take steps toward healing. And it left us with a powerful lesson. Real change is possible when people stand up, speak out, and refuse to accept injustice.